For maximum picture quality, it may be necessary to adjust the tracking control on your VCR.
Something that I never did. I didn't like to kiss babies, though I didn't mind kissing their mothers. I didn't like to slap backs or other parts of the anatomy. But mingling with people, I really enjoyed if there wasn't too much with it. So many hours or minutes a day that I can spend in crowds, and I love it. But after one point, it breaks, and I don't love it. So if you don't want me to start making faces and knocking people's hats off, as Ishmael does, limit the time.
The idea of politician as rock star was something new for Canadians. The phenomenon of Trudeau-mania is often connected with the nation's mood during its centennial year, celebrated with Expo 67 in Montreal, and a burst of flag-waving enthusiasm across the country. A time of supreme confidence and forward-looking ideas.
I think people had been fed up with ponderous politicians, and they were prepared for somebody who was ready to take a chance with changing ideas and things. And I think they saw in me as somebody who felt good about the country and didn't take it too seriously. They were lightheaded and I was lightheaded.
The 1968 leadership campaign was put on hold when the Liberal government was suddenly defeated in a critical parliamentary vote that would normally trigger an election. All ministers were required to stay in Ottawa to maneuver around the parliamentary crisis. Trudeau advised on the legality of the Liberal tactics.
Are you compromising any of your own principles by going along with what the government is doing?
I can't think of any that I'm compromising. Can you?
The affair brought another major advantage to Trudeau. It destroyed the candidacy of Finance Minister Mitchell Sharp.
The campaign, Mr. Sharp.
When it was clear that his own campaign was failing, just before the convention, Sharp announced that he was pulling out of the race and backing Trudeau.
With Mr. Trudeau this afternoon, I'm more confirmed than ever in my support for him.
The backing of Mitchell Sharp gave Trudeau a much-needed boost, for which he is grateful to this day.
At any rate, I can recall the stories that were being spread about you. They forgot you were a rich man. They assumed that you were a communist who was going to disrupt the whole system of the country. And after all, you had supported the CCF at one time.
And I'd been to Russia in '52.
Yes, that's right. Well, at any rate, when I, the Minister of Finance, said you could rely on this man, I think that it probably did have a very considerable effect.
Enhanced my credibility.
In the first week of April 1968, the Trudeau campaign rolled into Ottawa by train from Montreal. In many ways, it was a children's crusade. Trudeau had a strong hold on the youth delegates, and many of his organizers were young. There was a lot of resistance to the Trudeau candidacy from the Liberal Party establishment. A Stop Trudeau movement was forming in the days before the convention, and the media sensed a battle approaching.
Pressmen and your followers in the public.
Does it bug you at all that you're you're considered the man to stop at this point? 2 days before the voting, is this...
Yeah, no, I don't see if I were to worry about it, you know, and say what can I do to stop the stoppers and what deals can I make.
The surprise endorsement of the popular Newfoundland Premier Joey Smallwood gave the Trudeau campaign a sense of gathering momentum.
What I like about it is this man is going to bring us 1 million young men and women to the Liberal banner who without him wouldn't even bother to vote.
At the Ottawa Civic Arena, the stage was being set for the leadership drama. The lead actor arrived to play his part. Looking back at these black and white images, Trudeau sees himself almost as a stranger.
But the person is no longer me. The person was somebody else that I was acting with my own lines. I'm a little embarrassed at it sometimes. I can see the novice who's acting a bit, maybe. I can see by certain gestures or a certain inclination of the head that I'm just learning to be a politician. Sometimes I think I tended to look a bit too cute with, you know, winking at an interviewer or taking a pose of some kind. Certainly not willfully, but subconsciously I was learning my role, and I was not a very good actor. That's some of the feelings I have.
On the day of the leadership vote, April 6, 1968, the attempt to stop Trudeau picked up steam.
Attention, please, ladies and gentlemen. Paul Martin, 277.
The senior candidate of the Liberal establishment, Paul Martin, was humiliated by his low first ballot result. He withdrew from the race, but refused to throw his support to Trudeau. The other candidates and ministers from English Canada scrambled to put together a coalition to beat Trudeau, but the attempt was stumbling and chaotic.
I don't know. I think I really don't know what we should do. Want to think about it and talk some more? Might do.
Robert Winters was the biggest threat. He was in the number 2 position and wanted the number 3 man, Paul Hellyer, to join him.
Trudeau will not win this vote because there's no one to go to. Fight, Paul, fight! He's only got 300 to go. No, but
Hellyer said no, but was under extreme pressure from his supporters, especially Secretary of State Judy LaMarche, to change his mind so that Trudeau could be stopped.
It's tough, but what the hell's the point of going down and letting that bastard be there? Come on, Paul, you're 44. We still got lots of time.
Hellyer would not budge.
I think it'll be too late.
On the third ballot, Trudeau's lead was shrinking, and Hellyer finally threw his support to Robert Winters. Now John Turner was under pressure to drop off the ballot and support Winters, but he resisted. On the fourth ballot, Trudeau needed 1,200 votes to win.
Here, E. Trudeau, 1203.
What surprised our little gang, anyhow, is that how easy it was to get yourself in a position of importance in a long, historically established party. We were outsiders, complete outsiders, even severe critics of the Liberal Party. I remember some of the old guard politicians, I don't mean that in a derogative sense, but some of the old-timers, they were wept. These young guys are outsiders, and they took control of our party, sort of thing.
Canada must be unified. Canada must be one. Canada must be progressive. And Canada must be a just society.
In the spring of 1968, just 3 days after being sworn in as Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau called a general election and set out across the country campaigning. It was less an electoral battle than a coronation. Trudeau-mania was at its peak, but the hysteria began to make him nervous.
It was at the same time a lot of fun to see a lot of happy people and smiling people want to shake your hands and mingle with you and so on. But there was a sense of unease, and I think I very soon on began to tell people around me, look, I'm no miracle worker. But I would go on making my speeches and pushing linguistic equality and economic equality. And that was my message during that whole campaign.
Trudeau's principal opponent in 1968 was Robert Stanfield, elected Conservative leader a year earlier. In comparison to Trudeau, the former Nova Scotia Premier appeared stiff and staid.
We're all agreed that the present economic situation in the country calls for some restraint in taxing and spending by the various levels of government in our country.
I liked him, and in a sense I felt that sometimes he was being unjustly treated, indirectly by myself and more directly by the media. He was not the Trudeau-mania type of guy, but he was probably closer to the type of real man that I was than the one who was playing the politician. You know, he was intelligent, reflective, not aggressive, and when as leader of the opposition he'd play the aggressive role. I could sense it was a role, and he was doing it because he had to do it rather than because he was an aggressive man. In a sense, I felt I had an unfair advantage over him. Canada was no longer wanting to vote for a quiet man.
In 1967, Trudeau's Conservative opponents had tried to come to an accommodation with Quebec nationalism by talking about a theory of Canada as a social contract principally between two nations, French and English.
The question of the two nations is no longer debatable in the province of Quebec.
It was a dangerous flirtation with Quebec separatism in Trudeau's mind.
In 7 years, they haven't managed to tell us what they mean by two nations. What do you mean by two nations? What do you mean by special status to Quebec?
In English Canada, Trudeau was widely seen as someone who was going to put Quebec in its place. He did not shrink from that reputation, but gave it his own twist.
Well, I am trying to put Quebec in its place, and the place of Quebec is in Canada, nowhere else.
Trudeau was often labeled a traitor in Quebec. One incident took place during the '68 election campaign at the funeral of Trudeau's friend, the prominent French-Canadian intellectual and journalist, André Laurendeau.
Coming out from the church, Saint-Viateur Church, I was with Pelletier and Marchand, and somebody in the crowd shouted at us, "You bunch of traitors," you know, and there was hate in his face, and I didn't like that feeling. In a sense, there is this xenophobic feeling, I guess. Is he really one of us if he's going to work with those Anglos? And if he's accepted as he is by those Anglos, it must be because in some way he's selling us out to them.
On the night before the 1968 election, at the Saint-Jean-Baptiste parade in Montreal, Trudeau's confrontation with Quebec nationalists came to a climax. He was warned to stay away, or there would be trouble.
I took the position that if I didn't go and answered an invitation, if I didn't answer the invitation of the City of Montreal to be present on the reviewing stand, it meant that I wasn't at home in Quebec, and that would have defeated the whole purpose of my being in politics.
In the middle of the parade, empty glass bottles began raining down on the reviewing stand. There was a panic among the dignitaries, who were blinded by the television lights. The police insisted that everyone should move out, but Trudeau, shaking them off, decided to stand his ground against the separatist protesters.
Monsieur Trudeau insiste, il veut demeurer sur place.
I was being nervy again. I just sort of said, why should I leave? I'm here, I'm invited. You guys should leave, which the police made sure they did.
The image of Trudeau as the brave loner prepared to stand up to the separatist extremists provided him with a dramatic closer to his election campaign. The next day, the performance was replayed on every newscast and in every newspaper. It was a strong final boost.
the federal election, 1968. Here is Norman Defoe.
Good evening. Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau and his Liberals have the first majority government we've had in this country since 1962.
After the excitement of the leadership campaign and the '68 election, it was time for Pierre Trudeau to start implementing the just society he had talked so much about. First, he intended to change the way the government of Canada operated. He set up a more collegial cabinet system where all ministers would be briefed for every major decision in every department. It was somewhat unwieldy and made for slow progress on reform. Trudeau wanted a drastic remake of the Prime Minister's office, and he assigned that task to his new principal secretary, Marc Lalonde.
I believe of these two functions.
Lalonde is one of the few who served in the Prime Minister's office under both Trudeau and his predecessor, Lester Pearson.
There was a big difference in terms of you as a Prime Minister and Mr. Pearson as a Prime Minister. Mr. Pearson was probably the last of the Prime Ministers we've had who knew practically every Deputy Minister by their first name. He had been a former civil servant. He was part of the team. His office was like a train station. I mean, it was unbelievable that the thing worked, but you didn't know the establishment. You didn't know the bureaucracy. So it was quite clear that we had to develop new mechanisms. And the object was to allow a much better participation by ministers in the whole debate and by parliamentarians in the decision-making process.
And also, you'll recall, we were trying to sell participatory democracy. I felt that unless the whole group of cabinet ministers knew at least the essential elements of every important decision, they couldn't get involved in participatory democracy.
I remember Eric Kieran's complaining about the bloody seminars, as he called them, those cabinet committees, because he thought the system took too long to make decisions, that ministers debated and debated.
The priority for Trudeau and his new team was to make French Canadians feel more at home with the federal government.
Business of culture.
The Prime Minister gave the responsibility for designing bilingualism policies to his old friend, now the Secretary of State, Gerard Peltier.
The strongest point of the separatist feeling, and even of the nationalist ethic, is that this is an unjust country. We can't even speak our own language. We go to Ottawa, we met at the door of Parliament, we want to see our member of Parliament. We can't speak to a policeman or to a porter who will understand what we say. We're not at home. We elect people to Ottawa, but we can't reach them. We pay taxes to Ottawa, but we can't be in our own language. We go to the courts and we can't be heard in our own language, and so on. So everything that was federal, we said we would make bilingual.
Thousands of federal civil servants were dragooned into language